Dzień dobry w Warszawie, virtualnie. Good afternoon to Ireland, and bonjour à tous au Canada. My name is Jeanette Sotner, and I am the political counselor at the Embassy of Canada to Poland and Belarus. Szanowni panie dyrektorze komendanci, szanowna pani pułkownik, dear ambassadors, dear panelists, szanowni państwo. Welcome to hashtag Women in Peace. Witamy w hashtag Kobieta a pokoj. This collaboration between Poland, Ireland, and Canada started back in March of this year, and we are thrilled to finally meet you today. Why these three countries? Well, Canada has made promoting the United Nations Security Council Resolution 1325 on women, peace, and security a keystone of our foreign and defense policy agenda. It's one of our top-line priorities. Poland recently served on the UN Security Council, finishing its term in 2019, and focused on the protection of civilians in war zones, and particularly on the protection of women, people with disabilities, and children. In terms of boots on the ground experience, Poland has contributed over 120,000 soldiers to peacekeeping efforts. Ireland is currently sitting on the UN Security Council and held the presidency during September 2021. In preparing for today, I was impressed to learn that Ireland has 60 years of continuous service on peacekeeping missions. Poland and Ireland served together most recently in Lebanon. We will start today with welcome remarks from the Commandant Rector of the Military University of Technology, or Wojskowa Akademia Techniczna, Professor Przemysław Wachulak. Next, we will hear from Her Excellency Leslie Scanlon, Canada's ambassador to Poland and Belarus. And final welcoming remarks will be provided by Colonel Beata Targonska of the Council for Women in the Polish Armed Forces at the Polish Ministry of Defense.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, I am very pleased to welcome you to the Women, Peace and Security Conference. The Military University of Technology is proud to co-organize this event. I hope that today's meeting will be an excellent opportunity to exchange ideas, information and experiences on the role and challenges of Women for Peace. It is extremely pleasing that the number of women in the Polish army is gradually increasing. The percentage of women admitted to the military service increases by an average of 1% per year. At the Military University of Technology, there are currently over 20 women among the professional staff, while over 500 women out of over 3,000 of all military students who study in uniform. For 3 years, the interest of women in military studies at our university has been almost twice as high as in the previous years. Undoubtedly, the promotion of the military service of women contributes to this, to which our university is actively joining. The essence of the mission of the Military University of Technology is preparation of graduates ready to serve the Polish state with their knowledge, both in military and civilian areas, and in a broader perspective in building peace in our country and in the world. The high quality of the education process, ensured by the excellently prepared research and teaching staff, has always been and is the priority of the Military University of Technology. Years of experience have resulted in the fact that the Military University of Technology is annually classified among the best technical universities in Poland. The current position of the Academy is determined by a very high involvement of our university in research projects related to defense and state security. Ladies with technical education, researchers, experts in technical and social sciences also participate in them. The service of women in the armed forces requires the education of the public. It should be shown that female soldiers and ladies employed in the defense sector change the surrounding reality. A new image of the armed forces is slowly emerging as a place open to the valuable contributions made by women. Specialist knowledge, multitasking, responsibility, and many other abilities and psychophysical features and skills assigned to women increase the potential of the Army. That's why it's worth ensuring that women are adequately involved in efforts to maintain and promote peace and security. Any gender-related barriers should not restrict competent people in decision-making processes with conflict prevention and resolution. I am convinced that today's exchange of experiences will confirm the important role women play in peace and security. Thank you for your participation, and I wish you a successful conference. Thank you very much.
Szanowny rektorze, szanowna pani pułkownik, dear Ambassador O'Connell, dear panelists, chers amis et collègues, serdecznie witam państwa na panelu poświęconym kobietom w misjach pokojowych. Canada has a long history of advocating for and supporting gender equality, of promoting the empowerment of women and girls, of calling for the protection of their human rights, and of fighting sexual and gender-based violence, including in conflict settings. Canada was instrumental in the adoption of the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action in 1995 and in bringing the issue of sexual violence against women to the UN's attention. The Canadian Embassy cooperates closely with civil society organizations supporting women's rights in Poland. Our partners include the Women's Rights Center, the Centrum Praw Kobiet, and Niebieska Linia. These organizations focus on improving the health and safety of women through education and advocacy. This is one way in which we act locally to incorporate Canada's feminist foreign policy in our work in Poland. I'm looking forward to today's discussion to learn how this local work compares with the important work being done by peacemakers, men and women, on their missions. As you will hear from the panelists, violent conflict affects women, girls, men, and boys in different ways. Canada believes that it is important that these consequences are recognized and addressed, as urged by the United Nations Security Council in the Women, Peace and Security Agenda. Women's organizations, and networks play important roles in advocating for peace, mobilizing peace movements, and in preserving communities, including ensuring safety for women in their societies. These women leaders are courageous because this work often comes at great risk. Peace builders across the world face threats and attacks against themselves and their families from those who have vested interests in the conflict or in the status quo. That said, women, peace, and security is not about the idea that women are inherently more peaceful than men. No. Instead, it is that best policies result when the people affected by them have a voice in their creation. It is through the inclusion of women, not just as recipients of aid or protection, but in decision-making at all levels that societies can achieve true human security. Where women are included, peace is more enduring. Where women are included in the economy, economic growth is greater. Where women are included in governance, states are more stable. Where women, in all their diversity, are included in our collective security, everyone is safer. Including women and girls matters because no society can possibly reach its full potential when half its population is held back. Thank you. Merci. Dziękuję.
Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Ministry of National Defense, and in particular Council for Women in the Polish Armed Forces, I would like to welcome you to today's meeting devoted to women on foreign missions. The issue of women in the uniformed services that also serve abroad is not often mentioned in the public debate about security. It is important to remember priceless benefits from the active service of women, both in uniforms and civilians, and their participation in peace building, peacemaking, and peacekeeping operations. I hope that today's meeting will be an inauguration of a further debate about these aspects of women, peace, and security, and will be continued in a growing international format. Thank you for your attention.
Now I have the great honor of presenting our distinguished panelists. To our panelists, please give a little wave when I introduce you. First, we will hear from Ms. Gwyneth Coutts, Director General of the Peace and Stabilization Operations Program at Global Affairs Canada, our foreign ministry. In addition to serving as ambassador to Peru, Bolivia, Argentina, Paraguay, and El Salvador, Ms. Coutts has worked on human rights and in relation to energy and the environment. Hopefully she remembers that I worked as a human rights policy officer when she was in charge of the division about 15 years ago. Next, we will hear from Lieutenant Colonel Timothy O'Brien, the current Executive Officer for Planning and Capabilities at the headquarters of the Irish Defence Forces. While I would have a lot of questions regarding those responsibilities, we will hear from the Lieutenant Colonel today based on his previous responsibility as school commandant of the United Nations Training School, Ireland. There, he was responsible for pre-deployment training on human rights, cultural awareness, prevention of sexual exploitation and abuse, the protection of civilians, and mainstreaming the gender perspective. Lieutenant Colonel O'Brien has served 8 times on peacekeeping operations, including in Lebanon, East Timor, Afghanistan, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and Syria. And finally, presenting just before our question and answer session, we will hear from Captain Katarzyna Rzadkowska. Captain Rzadkowska is currently serving as a gender advisor in the Operation Unifor Med Irini in Rome, Italy. You can see her logo behind her. She will speak to her previous experience as a Polish peacekeeper, where she was deployed 3 times, twice to Kosovo, and most recently to Lebanon. Captain Rzadkowska has a very impressive academic career with a doctorate in political studies and a master's degree in English philology. Many of you will be aware that Captain Rzadkowska is a proud graduate of the VOT, having attained a first place when completing her Master's of Science in 2014. One housekeeping note before we start, I invite the panelists to feel free to comment or add to each other's presentations. It's meant to be an exchange, and to pose questions at the end. Just wave your hand or use the little hand-raising function on the platform. And now, Ms. Coutts, over to you.
Merci beaucoup, Jeanette. I'm very pleased to be here today to speak with all of you about the Women, Peace and Security Agenda. We call it the WPS Agenda, and the importance of increasing women's participation in peace operations specifically. So I'd like to start today with a little bit of an introduction on the Women, Peace and Security Agenda. And it's important to understand that peace is more than the absence of gunfire or conflict. It's about living a life which is free of threats and violence, about being safe, having food on the table, clean water to drink, and access to health care. So peace requires the need to comprehend the root causes of violence and conflict and to seek solutions to them. Everyone is affected by conflict. However, women and men, girls and boys, all experience conflict differently. And so it makes sense that they bring different perspectives to conflict resolution and to peace building. There is a direct link between women's participation in peace processes and more durable peace agreements. And yet, women are still very often excluded from formal peace processes. In fact, Harvard researchers have found that the single biggest predictor of whether or not a country would go to war with itself or with its neighbors is not its gross domestic product, nor its level of democratization, nor its ethnic or religious affiliation. It is how well women are treated compared to men. So in recognition of the different impact of conflict on women and girls and of the unique abilities that they bring to prevent, to end, and to recover from conflict, in the year 2000, the United Nations Security Council adopted Resolution 1325, which forms the basis of the Women, Peace and Security Agenda, together with the 9 resolutions focusing on WPS since then. So when you hear people say the WPS agenda, these resolutions form the international basis for that concept. And this agenda calls for the full, equal, and meaningful participation of women in the prevention, mediation or management, and resolution of conflict, humanitarian responses, peacekeeping, peace building, and post-conflict reconstruction, counterterrorism, and preventing and countering violent extremism. It's a whole spectrum. And I stress the word meaningful here because it's not enough to simply consult women once and carry on, or throw a woman or two into the meeting. Women need to be engaged and their perspectives integrated at every step of the process. I also want to be clear that the WPS agenda is not about an idea that women are inherently more peaceful than men, but it is the idea that the best policies and practices and decisions on the way forward will result when all people affected by these policies and decisions have a voice in their creation. Women play a complex range of roles in conflicts and in society, from fighters who join armed groups, to community leaders who provide alternatives to extremist propaganda, to women in security forces who put their lives on the line, working to create safer communities, to reduce corruption, to rebuild trust when there is deep-seated mistrust, and to develop genuine relationships between security forces and communities. So Canada believes that UN peace operations should better reflect the communities that they serve. However, women in particular remain underrepresented as UN peacekeepers, and especially in uniformed roles. So back in 2015, the Security Council adopted Resolution 2242, which called for the doubling of the number of women in military and police roles by the year 2020. At the time of adoption, women made up 4.2% of uniformed peacekeepers. In other words, men made up 96% of uniformed peacekeepers. And at the pace of change back in 2015, it would have taken until 2054 to reach the target of only 8.4% women peacekeepers. That's more than a generation to get to 8%. So given this, at the November 2017 UN Peacekeeping Ministerial, which was held in Vancouver, Canada, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau launched the Elsi initiative for women in peace operations. The Elsi initiative is a pilot project that seeks to identify the approaches to overcome barriers and increase the meaningful participation of uniformed women in UN peace operations. I note here again the word meaningful. The Elsi initiative defines meaningful participation as the presence and leadership of women in UN peace operations across all ranks and functions. Women are able to participate meaningfully when they contribute to and are included in all aspects of operational and mission planning and decision-making processes, when they hold operational command and leadership positions, and non-traditional as well as non-stereotypical roles, when they have access to the same training, promotion, and career advancement opportunities as their colleagues who are men, when they hold positions that are in line with their training, rank, and area of expertise, and when their workplace is free from all forms of harassment, including sexual harassment, bullying, and intimidation. So it's not enough to say we need to increase women's deployments without examining the factors that have excluded women in the past and continue to exclude women in the present. And we recognize that no one country has all of the solutions to address the complexities of gender inequality in UN peace operations. And so Canada is working with partners across the UN system, with member states, with think tanks and civil society to identify effective ways to increase the meaningful participation of women. There are 6 components to Canada's Elsi initiative. One is bilateral partnerships with the Ghana Armed Forces, the Zambia Police Service, and the Ministry of the Armed Forces of Senegal. These partnerships are focused on examining the context of these institutions, identifying both the barriers and the opportunities facing women's deployment to UN peace operations, and identifying the approaches to strengthen women's opportunities and overcome those barriers. The second component is the UN's Elsi Initiative Fund for Uniformed Women in Peace Operations. This was launched by UN Women in 2019, and it's currently in its second programming cycle. So it's designed to use collective resources to increase the meaningful participation of uniformed women in UN peace operations. It allows countries that contribute troops and police, as well as UN organizations, to access funding to support the deployment of trained and qualified uniformed women. We also work on receptive environments in missions. This relates to the physical and the socio-cultural environments at UN missions and understanding the role that the physical infrastructure, as well as the workplace culture, play in women's choices to deploy. We also work on advocacy, outreach, and policy change. This work ensures that the issues facing women in peacekeeping are raised with member states nationally, but also at the UN. This outreach is necessary for policy change. I mentioned earlier that in 2015, women made up 4.2% of uniformed peacekeepers. Now they make up just over 7%, so we're accelerating the pace of change. But this change didn't happen just on its own, because remember, that pace was incredibly slow previously. This was the result of concerted efforts by member states and the UN to increase women's deployments. For example, in 2018, the UN launched its Uniformed Gender Parity Strategy, which outlines targets for each year up to the year 2028. Research funding is another core component of the Elsi initiative. When we started the initiative, there was very little evidence or existing research on women in peacekeeping. So Canada has funded the Geneva Centre for Security Sector Reform, you might know it by its initials DCAF, to publish a baseline study and to create a groundbreaking and comprehensive barrier assessment that's now publicly available for countries to use. We've also funded the International Peace Institute to examine a whole bunch of issues related to sexual harassment and taboos and stigmas facing women in mission. And we funded the Georgetown Institute for Women, Peace and Security to examine the role that gender plays in a mission's operational effectiveness. Monitoring and evaluation is the final component, but no less important, because the Elsi initiative is a pilot project, and so it's crucial that we learn from all aspects of our work and that those lessons be made available to everyone in order to move forward. So today you're going to hear from Lieutenant Colonel Tim O'Brien, who will speak to what it means to operationalize WPS agenda in a training context. And then we're really fortunate to have Captain Kasia Jakowska. I'm sorry about that. I always have difficulty pronouncing names. She's a peacekeeper who will help to share some of the perspectives of women in peace operations that drive the work of the Elsi initiative. We work to ensure that women's voices are heard and their experiences in peacekeeping missions are valued and taken into account. But we also speak with men because gender equality is not a zero-sum game. Because we aim to increase women's deployments, this does not take away opportunities for men to deploy. That this is all about creating equal opportunities for both women and men. So I hope that you're going to take away one key point for all of this, which is that women have the right to serve their country in UN missions, and they're equally capable as men to do so. Few people would disagree with that statement, but we've seen that it's sometimes more difficult to make that a reality because the systems that are in place now were originally created for men. So it's not about changing women, but about changing the systems and environments to ensure that they're inclusive of all people. So while progress has been made, there is so much more to do. And as you begin your careers, it's important for you to integrate this gender lens in your work, to take the time to understand how certain policies and actions might impact those who are different from you, whether that's by race, gender, ability, or any other social factor, and how they might intersect, resulting in a completely different way of experiencing the world. You can encourage your national security institutions like the Armed Forces or the National Police to undergo the comprehensive barrier assessment, which has been designed by DCAF. You can encourage your governments to draft and to implement a national action plan on women, peace, and security. You can amplify the voices and the experiences of peacekeepers, women and men, in your circles and networks. In short, there are many ways that you can incorporate this perspective in your work, and I encourage you to do so. Policies are better, and peace is longer lasting when different perspectives and experiences are included in policymaking from the beginning. So thank you very much for listening, and I look forward to hearing from the other speakers.
So good afternoon, everyone from Dublin. My name is Lieutenant Colonel Tim O'Brien, and as an introduction and to put in context my presence here on the panel, I should explain that the Irish Defence Forces have been participating in United Nations peacekeeping operations since 1958, when we first deployed peacekeepers to Lebanon. And today we find ourselves once again in Lebanon, this time with our Polish colleagues as part of a joint Irish-Polish infantry battalion. In total, approximately 72,000 members of my organisation, the Defence Forces, have served on UN peacekeeping operations. And we are the only military in the world to have an unbroken record of 63 years peacekeeping. And that's something we're extremely proud of. It's worth reminding all of us here, though, today that that comes at a cost, sometimes in human life. And 87 of our colleagues have died in the service of the United Nations peacekeeping forces. So for us in the Defence Forces, peacekeeping is an extremely important topic, and we welcome any opportunity such as this to advocate for the importance of peacekeeping as a tool of the Security Council in dealing with a myriad of international conflicts. So in considering what I was going to speak about over the next 10 minutes, I thought it might be useful to answer some questions that broadly surround the topic we're here to discuss today. And the first one, I suppose, is what does it mean for women to meaningfully participate in peacekeeping operations? So in answering that question, I will draw from my own experience, if that's okay, rather than from any academic sources. So women first joined the Irish Defence Forces in 1979, and 2 years later, our first female peacekeepers were deployed in 1981. And to date, 1,400 Irish female soldiers have served on peacekeeping operations. However, up until the early 1990s, our female soldiers were confined to administrative or support roles. But since that time, women now serve in all roles in the Defence Forces, be they command, staff, operational, or indeed administrative and support. We do not set quotas either for men or women when selecting personnel for peacekeeping operations, and neither do we fill appointments by gender. The selection process is gender blind. However, when dealing with the local populations, we understand from our knowledge of the gender perspective that we are far more effective if we use both male and female peacekeepers. When we do this, we are able to engage meaningfully with all members of the host nation society and not just the 50% who happen to be men. This is particularly important in some parts of the world that we operate in, where it is unacceptable either for cultural or for religious reasons for foreign men to engage with local women. In order to achieve the objective of being able to engage, this means that women as well as men must be fully involved in all operations. Therefore, women peacekeepers take part in foot and vehicle patrols. They operate observation posts. They're members of civilian military engagement teams or human intelligence teams. And they also hold senior command appointments so that they can engage in what the military refer to as key leader engagement. The days of female peacekeepers staying in UN posts, filling administrative appointments, working as clerks or chefs are over, and they will never return. That, I suppose, leads me to another question. are there any particular challenges that women face on peacekeeping operations? So from my experience, I would suggest that our younger female peacekeepers face no more challenges than their male counterparts. However, once women start having children, domestic challenges present themselves. Although things are changing slowly in Ireland, the burden of childcare still falls on women, and they are normally the primary carer within an Irish family. So how can you facilitate female soldiers deploying overseas on peacekeeping operations while also allowing them to care for their children? This is a challenge, and I cannot pretend that we are better than any other military in dealing with it. However, one thing we have done since 2015, and this was in response to the discussion that you heard mentioned and what we call the Vancouver pledges for increasing the number of women, was that we have selected a certain number of appointments in our unit in Lebanon, where we work with the Polish Army, which we label as family-friendly appointments. These appointments are only 3 months in duration, and they are open to primary carers in a family, be they male or female. The third thing I'm going to address today is, well, why should we bother with gender training? You know, why is this of importance to the military? Is it something that soldiers should concern themselves at all? Well, again, from my experience, there are 4 very good and very straightforward reasons why we have to conduct gender training. First of all, gender is topical. That's why we are here today discussing the role of women peacekeepers. And no soldier, myself included, wants to look foolish when a topic has been discussed about peacekeeping and we don't know what it's about. We also need to understand why every UN peacekeeping commander has a gender advisor on their staff. Secondly, as I mentioned earlier, gender makes sense. To fully understand if you understand the gender perspective, you understand that the local population is made up of men, women, and children, and that for you to be able to engage with them, you have to have men and women deployed on the ground. Thirdly, in Ireland, it's government policy that we do it, that the Defence Forces receive training. And that direction is contained in Ireland's National Action Plan on promoting the Women, Peace and Security agenda. And then the final reason, and possibly the most straightforward for all soldiers, is that because we have to. It's included in our orders for UN missions. Contemporary peacekeeping operations all have mandates from the Security Council that one way or another refer to UN SCR 1325. And 21 years ago, that landmark resolution moved gender equality from being a development issue to being a security issue. It changed the lens from development to security. And what we refer to as the 4 Ps, the prevention of abuse, the protection of women and children, the promotion of a gender perspective, and the participation of women in decision-making are now a key element in any peacekeeping mandate, and we have to be trained to understand that. As a former school commandant of our pre-deployment school, I will now look at how we approach the training of peacekeepers. So all of our peacekeepers deploy either under United Nations, a European Union, a NATO, or an OSCE mandate. All of these organizations have mandatory training that must be completed before people deploy to their missions. The UN in particular insists that we have qualified gender advisors or gender focal points serving with each peacekeeping unit. Gender and the gender perspective form what we now refer to as a human security block of pre-deployment training. And it is closely linked with the cross-cutting topics of the protection of civilians, the protection of children, the prevention of sexual exploitation and abuse, and cultural property protection. What we have learned from experience, however, is if the first time soldiers are encountering these important topics is during pre-deployment training, then you're wasting your time. Any period of pre-deployment training is intense, and soldiers have a lot of things in their minds, including leaving their families for 6 months. So the way we feel is better is if we attempt to mainstream the gender perspective into the everyday training of the Defence Forces. And we do that by including a comprehensive peacekeeping block of instruction on all career courses. And this allows time for far more in-depth instruction and discussion on these topics. Finally, We also share our experience with an international audience by running international courses on peace support, which includes the gender perspective. And these are run in our UN training school and are open to foreign as well as Irish military, police and civilians. And the civilians normally include a mixture of diplomats, UN staff and third level lecturers and staff. The focus of today's discussion is on the role women can play in peacekeeping. But as the male on the panel, I might come back to what was already mentioned and ask what contribution can males play peacekeeping? Well, again, going back to the gender perspective, we know that men have different security needs and face different threats to women and children. More men are killed in direct fighting than women, whereas more women die as the indirect consequences of conflicts than men. To engage properly with men, you need to have men in your forces. And we also have to face the reality that just like in Canada, 93% of Irish Defence Forces are made up of males, with only 7% represented by females. Therefore, without men, you do not have a peacekeeping force. Increasing the number of women in our organisation is an ongoing challenge, and we recognise that our target audience are both secondary school girls, young women attending university, and their parents. And to succeed, we need to convince all of these groups that a military career is as good an option for women as it is for men. In that light, I would encourage any women watching this seminar to consider the military as a career. And I promise you, if you do, you will not be disappointed. So I will finish there, and I look forward to engaging with what I'm sure will be some very interesting questions from our Polish audience. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I would like to express my happiness that this conference is conducted by my alma mater, the Military University of Technology. And it is really nice to go back even in this online form to the university where everything started. So I would like to share a little bit of my personal experience as I was asked to do so. And I started the studies at the Military University of Technology in 2009. And those 5 years of studies showed me where I can be in several years and what I would like to do in the future. So in 2014, I graduated from the university, achieving the professional degree of Master of Sciences. And later on, I started my service in the Military Training Center for Foreign Operations in Kielce as a CIMIC officer in the tactical support team for civil-military cooperation. So in the meantime, I took part in several conferences, workshops, or even in the defense industry exhibition in Kielce. So I served with the delegations from Mexico and Italy. And I also served as the commander of the CIMIC tactical support team. I took part in the mission, as it was mentioned, in the Republic of Kosovo during the 35 shift, working as an officer of the liaison monitoring team, and also during the 36th shift of the Polish military contingent KFOR as an analysis officer in the multinational headquarters of Joint Regional Detachment South. So the experience gained during the mission greatly expanded my knowledge and skills, giving an overview of working in the multinational and culturally foreign environment. In Kosovo, at first, we were responsible for 3 municipalities, and our basic tasks were to monitor and report the situation, as well as establish the good cooperation between military and civilian environment. For those who like working with people, I would strongly recommend to go deeper in the civil-military cooperation topic, because this is really nice experience later on for your serving time. And we lived in Kosovo, we lived in the field house rented from the local owner. So it was a great experience of the foreign culture taken just from everyday situations. We organized meetings with mayors, with police or firefighters representatives, with teachers and students from schools in our area of operation. We were also responsible for organizing and distributing humanitarian aid to the local communities. The most important and the valuable was the personal contact with people, and thanks to it, we could know their problems and their needs. So thanks to the good cooperation with the operational command, we were also able to supply some schools with books or sports equipment, and we also organized so-called White Saturdays that relied on providing basic medical help to the farthest villages where the access to the medical assistant was limited. In cooperation with Polish and, for example, Turkish and the local doctor, we were going to those villages to give basic medical checks to people in need. And we also had a chance to talk to local men, women, boys, and girls about their everyday life. And during my second deployment to Kosovo, I worked as an analysis officer in the Joint Regional Detachment. And it was kind of the upper level, and we were responsible for almost half of Kosovo. So my basic task was to contact with local communities as well as provide reports and data analysis. And for a few months, I was the chief of this analysis cell in Kosovo. And I also collaborated with different NGOs that focus on enhancing the level of life for the Kosovars. I also helped with coordinating KFOR CIMIC projects, such as providing classroom furniture and purchasing dental chair for local dentists. It was not only the great experience in working with a local community, but also in the multinational environment. Since 2019, I have been working at the Military Training Center for Foreign Operations as a public affairs officer. And I'm at home in Poland. I am responsible for managing all issues connected with information sharing, with dealing with journalists and other people or institutions that are interested in the military. I'm also responsible for the website and social media, and I provide the news analysis to the commander, and I am responsible for advising the commander in any public affairs matter. In 2019, I was deployed to Lebanon, as it was mentioned, as the chief of the engagement team. And together with our Irish colleagues, we were responsible for planning projects for local community and for establishing the good relationships with the citizens of South Lebanon. We plan to outfit the computer classrooms as well as to help the environmental protection by purchasing the big rubbish bins for one of the municipalities. But unfortunately, because of COVID, our plans have ruined. And instead of this, we provided South Lebanese with basic health protection kits. So thanks to the good cooperation with Caritas, with Redemptoris Missio, School for Peace organizations, we were able to facilitate local population with the necessary equipment. And Lebanon is the country full of varieties. It is mostly Muslim country, but it is not always easy to recognize, for example, Muslim women by the way she dresses. So the pre-deployment training as well as common sense on the ground is crucial. I met several women and girls who were eager to exchange their experience, and I'm sure that being a female officer makes it easier to establish a good relationship. We met with the representatives of the Red Cross, who also asked us to organize the classes or the lectures for women on family planning subject. Together with the Irish contingent, we provided several non-cost projects, such as physical training for students at school that seeks for the PT teacher, English classes. Also, our medics provided the medical training for the high school nursery students. And moreover, in our contingent, there was a female kickboxing instructor who gave the training for students all on self-defense. And we also organized an event at one of our bases where women from different associations were selling their homemade goods. I just want to mention these examples because I think they show that even without money, we still have capacity to build good relationship with the local population. And currently, I am deployed to UNAFOR-Med Irini operations as a gender advisor. And this operation's core task is the implementation of the UN arms embargo on Libya through the use of aerial, satellite, and maritime assets. But I'm responsible for advising the commander in gender-related issues, as well as provide the data analysis and training to the forces. It is very broad topic, starting from gender equality through sexual exploitation and abuse, sexual harassment, and conflict-related sexual and gender-based violence. And here, as a gender advisor, I would like to share that maybe the definition of the gender that is very often misunderstood, not only in Poland, but also in many countries. So basically, gender refers to the social differences and relations between women and men. And the term gender goes beyond the sex of an individual. So to include the way relationships are socially constructed. A person's gender is learned through socialization and is heavily influenced by the culture of the society concerned. So the gender of a person may result in different roles, responsibilities, opportunities, needs, and constraints for men, women, boys, and girls. So as I mentioned, it is connected with our everyday life. It is changeable and influenced by culture. And now you can imagine that what were our roles as children and what are they now? What is the role of a man or women in our culture, and what are the differences in other countries? What need or problems we had 15 or 20 years ago, and what are they now? How the social roles are changing when we go on the mission and we leave our partners or children at home. Someone has to fulfill our duties. The same situation is in the conflict or post-conflict areas. Our presence affect men, women, boys, and girls differently, as it was mentioned before. So conflict affects all these groups differently, and that's why it is so important to bear it in mind and be gender aware. And as an example, I would like to mention the very well-known situation, but maybe not for all of you. So the project of building a well in Afghanistan, soldiers thought it would be a great idea to build a well inside the village, so the women would no longer have to go many kilometers to provide water to their households. But when they finished the project, in a very short time, a well was destroyed. So they repaired, and again it was destroyed. And it turned out that those who did it were women, because going for water was their opportunity to socialize and to make friends. So this example shows that we should take or into consideration everyone and everyone's needs and bear it in mind wherever we want to conduct any projects or want to facilitate any community. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to our panelists who have given us a lot of information to think about. We're now going to be turning to our audience to ask you for your participation by sending through questions. And also, I would say to the other panelists, as well as we have, in addition, we have Ambassador Emer O'Connell from the Ambassador of Ireland to Poland, who's also a part of our panel. So if any of you have any questions or comments you want to make on a presentation by one of your fellow panelists, just give me a little wave and I'll turn to you. But in the meantime, for our audience, if you could please send your questions in English or in Polish, po angielsku albo po polsku, to questions@wat.edu.pl, and that's questions@wat.edu.pl. We encourage you to add in your name or background if you're comfortable doing so. It's always helpful to our panelists to know a little bit about the person asking the question, but of course you can also ask to remain anonymous. And I have to tell you that in listening to your presentation, I did note down a whole bunch of questions. I don't know if the audience is going to give me a chance to ask all my questions, but if they don't ask their own questions, I will take advantage of that opportunity. So one of the first questions that we have is, and this is a question to the entire panel, can you give us some examples of community engagement improvements that happened thanks to women's participation in missions? And we've already heard kind of an example from Captain Jadkowska, but perhaps there's other examples from our other two panelists. And one of the questions that I had relating to this is, where do the women community leaders come from typically? When you're going out in your communities to work in the communities, what kinds of women tend to assume leadership positions? Do they come from certain age groups in society? Are they from certain professions in society? How do they come about kind of demonstrating that leadership? So I'm going to, unless there's someone who waves their hand and wants to take the first kick at this can, then I might go first to Tim, and then I'll go to you, Gwen.
So I suppose to repeat what I was saying earlier, by having women deployed in operations, you find it much easier to engage with women. So an example would be during our deployments on the African missions in Liberia and Chad, when we would establish a field medical post to provide medical care in remote villages. If you didn't have a female medical officer or medic present, some women would not approach you. So by not having the women there in the first place, you fail. So, and just having representatives there makes some people feel more comfortable. You also have to have men there, because the opposite is that some men might not be comfortable only dealing with female peacekeepers. Who do we engage with in the mission area? Sometimes when we deploy, we will try and hire language assistants who are both male and female. And if you do that, they will give you an insight into the local community. We don't really deal with particular classes, but you would deal with professions. So it could be local teachers, local politicians, mayors, and you'll also, through the CIMIC teams that Katja mentioned, you'll engage with other members of the international community present, and they will give you advice. They could be NGOs, they could be other UN agencies, part of the UN country team. So there's always, if you're willing to engage and listen, there's plenty of advice on how to get into the mindset and into the culture of the local population.
Okay, I'll just follow up on that point, because I think what the Lieutenant Colonel has just said about listening is so incredibly important. If an engagement team goes out just to push a message out, they're not going to pick up the intelligence that they need in order for the UN peace operations to successfully operate in that area. And then this goes also to your question about, where are the leaders? The leaders are going to be as diverse as the context in which you are. So it might be a formal leader, might be the local authority of the township or the village, or it might be the woman who organizes the marketplace. Or in places where maybe that middle generation has been wiped out by conflict, maybe it's the youth leader from the school. So that's why it's so important to listen and for the mission to be accessible for all members of that community in order to be able to speak to the peacekeepers. I was talking to a peacekeeper once who had been out in the field, and she had developed an extraordinary relationship with the woman who organized the local markets. And they were in town one day, and the town was extraordinarily quiet. There were no members of the community out doing the normal things that they would normally do. And because that woman peacekeeper had built a relationship of deep trust with that woman community leader, she was able to learn that nobody was on the streets because that was the day that the gun runners came into town. And so everybody was taking cover. So if the peacekeepers had just been going through town in their patrols and not able to speak to the individuals who understood the community, they would have missed out on a core piece of information that helped the peace operation to fulfill some of its core responsibilities. So it goes back to that question of listening and learning from the community about what is important to the community and what's important to all aspects of that community. Thank you.
Thank you. And the next question I have is from our audience, and this is from Second Lieutenant Ivona Skudlarek. Skudlarek, I mispronounced her name. And the question relates to how officers are chosen on an assignment. And I think this is often really directed to Captain Jadkowska, but it would be interesting to hear as well from you, Tim. Are high language skills useful? Is that what the military will be looking for? Is there a clear set of guidelines or points that a candidate is marked against? What is the process for determining who is serving on those peacekeeping missions? So we'll start with Kasia and then go to Tim.
Okay, so first of all, for every mission, there is the set up list of positions that can be fulfilled. And then it depends on what position we are looking for a person. And it doesn't matter if it's men or women, but there are certain requirements. So as you mentioned, for the peacekeeping missions, for sure, it's the level of the language, of knowing the language. And it depends whether it's the officer position or the lower rank position. So it's up to the level. The other thing is the experience in the certain field or the certain position. And also, basically, there are the certain units that are responsible for giving the contingents. And those units, primarily, they took people from their units to fulfill the positions. And later on, they're looking for different people actually around of Poland to fulfill those positions. But the knowledge, background, and the language, these are, I think, the main characteristics that are taken into considerations.
For us, the UN, the unit we deploy overseas provides a particular skill set that's required by the UN mission in that particular country. So obviously you have to have the skill set to serve in that job. There will always be specialist skills that if you have them. So for instance, some of the courses that I would have run in my previous school, protection of civilians course, if you were a gender advisor, you have to have a gender advisor course, a civil military course. In our organization, because we're so small, our army is only 7,500 strong. There's really no difficulty in serving overseas. And whether you like it or not, every 3 or 4 years, you deploy overseas. So I suppose from that point of view, we're lucky because we're so small. But you do have to be capable of doing the job that your military has been asked to supply by the United Nations.
Wonderful. I can move on to the next question, but I just wanted to give a chance to either the other two panelists if they had a comment to make or. Great. Okay, so the next question is from Ambassador Leslie Scanlon. So my ambassador of Canada to Poland and Belarus. And she is asking a question around the training. And she notes that it's excellent that the government of Ireland has made it mandatory that gender training be core training within the military and that it is mainstreamed. Is this the case in Canada, and is this the case in Poland? Is there a mechanism for sharing women, peace and security training modules between militaries? And is the Irish military women, peace and security training developed internally, or is it adapted or taken from a deploying organization? So perhaps I'll start with Kasia on this one.
Okay, so my home unit, so the Military Training Center for Foreign Operations, provide lots of courses. And for example, one of them is the UN Military Observer course, where you have covered all the topics and the agenda is given from the UN. And even recently we got the certification from the UN. And this is the multinational course. So it is given for actually soldiers and sometimes civilians from all over the world. And we also provide several courses, CIMIC courses, also the international courses. So I think it's the background or the preparation before going to mission is really well prepared, and people can advantage a lot from those courses that are provided by actually my particular unit where I'm from.
So I suppose the first part of the question, is there a mechanism for cooperation? So absolutely there is. And every 6 months through a mechanism known as the Training and Education Peace Support Working Group, which is a NATO organization known as TEPSO, the school commandants of all the pre-deployment schools from Europe as well as from North America meet, and we have a week-long seminar. And at that we exchange ideas, we organize instructor swaps, and we just stay up to date. And in fact, that's where I first met my Polish colleagues and became aware of the Polish pre-deployment training school, was at one of those meetings. So we're constantly meeting with each other and updating our skill sets. Where do we get the syllabus of training from? Well, ironically, the leaders in Europe on gender mainstreaming is Sweden, which is the Swedish military deployment school, and they are the NATO lead for gender mainstreaming. So if you want to be a contemporary gender advisor, you go to that school, and it doesn't matter whether you're deploying in with the United Nations, the EU, or NATO. So generally, you'll find that schools tend to specialize in a particular area, and the known experts on gender are Sweden, just outside Stockholm.
And Quinn, I know that you're not from military, but would you have a sense, are you able to respond to the question on whether Canada has also similarly mainstreamed gender into our training?
Yes, of course, it is a core part of our training, and we also participate in some of the international peacekeeping courses to provide high-level skills training, including gender training to other peacekeeping nations.
Wonderful. So the next, I have a follow-up question from Ambassador Scanlon, and this is relating to sort of a recent history of the negotiation of peace agreements. And I think on this question, probably Gwyn will be the first one to respond, but of course we'd like to hear the perspectives of everyone. So noting the percentage of peace agreements with gender provisions is currently at 28.6%, more or less, and none of the ceasefire agreements reached between 2018 and 2020 included gender provisions. Is there anything more that the UN and individual member states can do to introduce that aspect to make sure that women are represented and participating in order to achieve this enduring nature of a peaceful settlement? So I'll start, as I mentioned, with Gwen, but I as well, and then I'll turn to both Tim and Kasia.
Okay, peace agreements are very complex, and not very many of them are actually successful, because first you have to get to the peace agreement and then you have to apply it, right? and not all of them are successfully applied. I spoke earlier about those peace agreements where women have been fully engaged as resulting in more enduring peace. And that's because the process is really important as well, not just if a peace agreement has some gender provisions that are sort of tacked on at the end. They need to be part of an organic process where the full population is consulted and active in the process. Just as Kasia was talking about, that well was destroyed because the women's views weren't taken into account. If you have a peace agreement that's got gender provisions, but women haven't been meaningful participants in the whole process, their perspective may not have been taken into account. So what can the UN and what can member states do? It's the continuous hard work of changing one mind at a time, making people realize from, a peace agreement is the formal thing at the very top very often of a whole process. But the relationships, the informal negotiations, the peace agreements between communities, what holds communities together, all of these are elements of lasting peace. And so the women and men need to be engaged in all of those elements. And so member states need to model the full engagement of women in peace operations, in peace negotiations at the formal and informal levels. The UN, when it sends a delegation in, it better have women as well as men who are fully engaged in the process, because when people see it, then it's possible to imagine how it can be successful. If it has never been done that way before, if women have never been included, then it's not seen to be necessary. But once you can see it, then you can replicate it, and you can work towards that more lasting peace, because that more lasting peace takes into account the perspectives, the concerns, and the needs of the full population. Thanks.
I suppose when we're lecturing on this topic, the official answer to that is that one of the 4 Ps that I referred to earlier from 1325 is women's participation. And that's all fine academically, but when I lecture on this topic, I give an example of a peace process, not in Africa or in Asia, but 100 miles away from where I'm sitting now in Northern Ireland. And 22 years ago, when the Good Friday Agreement was being negotiated by the British, Irish governments with United States help, women were being excluded from that by all of the political parties. And an election was to be held, and the top 10 political parties in that election would sit and negotiate the agreement. And none of them nominated any women. So a group of women came together in Northern Ireland and forced their way onto the political agenda. They labelled themselves the Women's Coalition, and they insisted that they have the voice. And by strength of willpower, they forced the men to ensure that there's a woman's voice. So it is certainly not easy for women. It's difficult, and sometimes they will not have any advocates. Their own community might feel it strange that they would vote for women. But that is an example we use, and it shocks Irish soldiers because they forget that we had a conflict on our own island. So that is the example I would give. And they produced an excellent documentary on those women known as Wave Goodbye to the Dinosaurs. And if anyone wants an example of a Western European EU country where women were excluded from a peace process, I recommend watching that, Wave Goodbye to the Dinosaurs. The dinosaurs being the men, by the way.
Kasia, did you have any thoughts on that you wanted to share? You don't have to, but if you have some thoughts.
I mean, it was, I think, already mentioned, and at the very beginning, sir, the colonel, he mentioned about the meaningful participation, and I think that both of you, Gwen and sir, you gave the best examples about how to do it, how to meaningfully participate, and that this is like the must that has to be fulfilled to achieve this.
Wonderful. wonderful. Thank you. Now I want to go a little bit into this, the discussion around this question of a gender advisor. And we've certainly heard about the training system, the expertise that the Swedish Training Academy brings. That's quite interesting. It feeds into this nuanced understanding of the word gender that Kasia has kind of brought out in her presentation. For Poland, Kasia, are you the first uniformed officer to be in this position, to be in the position advising the commander on gender issues? And if not, has this role traditionally been filled by women? Is it necessary, or do you think this man could also fill this role of being a gender advisor?
Oh yes, definitely. It doesn't matter whether you're a man or a woman to get this position. And as an example, I think it was around 2015 or 16 when on this position were one by one two officers from my military training center for foreign operations. And it was even before Irini operation and before Sofia operation was established here. So they got this position. And then actually it was changing. Sometimes it was women on this position, sometimes it was men. But coming back to the course in Sweden, I'm pretty sure that I was the first one from Poland who is graduated from this course. And I think that really I agree that they have very, very good training center, gender training center. And the lectures that they provide are very, very helpful during the mission.
Yeah, I would suggest that not only is it important for men to be gender advisors, but it's absolutely essential, because what you don't want is for gender to be seen as a topic that only the women are involved in. Then it becomes women's stuff. And Kasia gave an excellent definition of what gender is, and it has got nothing to do with men's stuff or women's stuff. It's about operational effectiveness. The gender perspective is another lens that we use in the military for planning operations and executing them. And we would never conduct any operation without doing an intelligence assessment, without doing a weather assessment to see, will the route we're traveling be flooded, or will it be covered in a dust storm? And we do numerous staff studies before we plan any operation. So all the gender perspective is another lens that allows us to do it. And if 93% of your organization are men, then you're going to take it that the majority of your gender advisors are also going to be men.
Do you have anything to add, Gwen? Or is that good?
I can't agree more with the perspective that we need to have both men and women serving as gender advisors, and this is ever so much, but also this sort of broad-based training so that all women and men understand the importance of applying that gender perspective and looking at how situations affect men and women differently is incredibly important across the board. So the gender advisors are there as specialists and to ensure specifically that is taking place. But a very practical problem with UN peacekeeping is that the UN peacekeeping budget is in terrible deficit. It's billions of dollars short of what's needed. And so when member states start to look at cutting the budget that goes to peacekeeping operations, things like human rights advisors and gender advisors are very often on the chopping block. And this is a deliberate push by some states, and so other states need to push it back and point to, as the Lieutenant Colonel has said, but the operational effectiveness of applying a gender perspective to a mission operations. It keeps your people safer, and it keeps the communities safer. And so that's why countries are countries like Canada and like some of the other countries on the panel today, especially those in the Security Council, push hard to make sure that these critical positions are not cut, and that across the board this sort of training takes place so that every soldier or officer out there has an appreciation and an understanding of this and can apply it in their work.
Wonderful. Coming up now, I'm going to give you each kind of specific questions more related to yourself. Starting with Kasia, this is your 4th mission. Why do you keep on going abroad? Is it something that's required of the Polish military, or is it something that you're applying for and choosing to participate in yourself? And what has kind of sparked that interest that has caused you to follow this particular career path?
Well, first of all, the Polish army is quite big, so actually we don't have so many missions to go. And there are still lots of volunteers who want to participate. And as you mentioned, this is my 4th mission, and I'm pretty lucky to be in this unit that prepares people for going abroad. And I'm also, I think, more lucky about having a good commander who is really open-minded and who allows you, because whenever you want to go, you have to have the permission from your commander. So I have this advantage that my commander is very experienced in missions abroad, and he is very open-minded to people who want to develop themselves and who want to do something more than just doing your everyday duties. So that's first of all the opportunity that I have, and I am taking, and also I was very, very eager to go to this mission because this is EU mission. I was twice in NATO missions and the UN mission, so I wanted to have just the full spectrum of all the operations abroad, and I'm really glad that actually it happened. And basically my interest, it's just a thing that I love working with people. And as a CIMIC officer, I had so many opportunities. And right now as a gender advisor, as well as at home as a public affairs officer, this is what makes me happy. And this is where I feel that I'm doing what I really love. So yeah, that's basically it.
Wonderful. And next time, turning to you, Gwen, what tools and frameworks have you, I think you've talked about it a little bit, but what tools or frameworks have you found to be particularly effective in bringing change? You mentioned the assessment of the barrier assessment, that, if that's something that you're able to expand upon, that might be quite interesting. And then more of a personal question. You've been in this field for a number of years now, but what was your biggest surprise and your biggest challenge after starting working on as a director of peacekeeping operations?
Okay, that's a lot of questions in there, but let me focus a little bit on the gender barrier assessment methodology, because I think if you're looking to put more women into UN peacekeeping operations, you have to look at the whole pipeline of recruitment and retention and promotion and deployment. So this barrier assessment methodology looks at what are the common barriers facing women in all of those stages of the process. And so they looked at things like, what is the eligible pool for deployment? What are the deployment criteria? How is the deployment selection done? What are the household constraints? Because very often those are put more on women than on men. But let's bear in mind that men also face household constraints. There can be single parents from both sides, or working families on both sides. Also, what does the peace operations infrastructure look like? What has their past peace operations experience been? Is there a career value to deploying to a UN peace operation, or is that deemed as time outside of your career and you don't get credit for it in your organization? What are the implications of top-down leadership? What is happening with those gender roles? What are the different expectations put on men and women as soldiers? And is that helpful or harmful? And of course, social exclusion. So those are like 10 big baskets of barriers, which the tool helps to articulate and define and to explode myths. For example, in one nation, it was assumed that women weren't going on a second deployment because of family considerations. But when you asked the women peacekeepers, they said what was blocking them was when they were sent out on their first deployment, they weren't given a meaningful role, despite the fact that they had the skills, they had the training, they had the rank, they had the experience. They weren't used to their full potential. And so you really need to understand in the first instance what the barriers are, and then as an institution you have to work to change the culture and the workplace in order to systematically remove those barriers. Another thing that Canada is doing is working with the United Nations in order to change the physical infrastructure of mission camps. This can be something as simple as better lighting at night to improve safety, to the location of different services on the camp. You know, is the laundry all the way across, or the lavatories across the camp, creating a safety issue. So looking at how to make the physical infrastructure more effective, more efficient, and more welcoming for all peacekeepers, women and men alike, is another of the tools. And in fact, we've supported the design of a receptive peace mission environment, which the UN now has available, and which countries can also take a look at for when they are designing their own camps for future use, or rehabilitating camps that they already have. So those are really important tools. Research, of course, is another part of the Elsi initiative, and also really, really important, because we need to understand why things are the way they are. What are the cultures? What are the attitudes that lead toward that? And to get to your second question, what have I found the most surprising? The most surprising, I guess, is how hard it is to accelerate change. But I think it's a momentum thing. And I think that once we start to get officers in particular on board, military personnel on board from the beginning, as soon as minds change, then systems change. And I think that the women that are in the military and the police services now, they're opening doors that they're not even aware that they're opening, because the girls can see, oh, I can be a fighter pilot, or I can be a member of a peacekeeping mission, because they see it. And so they know that it is possible. If somebody else has gone before, they know that it's possible. So I think that we're going to see an accelerating pace of change. It's already started. The more that we study, the more that we develop the tools in order to address those barrier assessments. And the Elsi initiative really is about incentivizing troop and police contributing nations to do the right thing. So those countries that are ready to take that next step can apply to the Elsi Initiative Fund for projects to break down those barriers. To either take the barrier assessment methodology in the first place, there's funding which is being provided for that, or then to take the next step to say, okay, we've identified this as a barrier, this is what we want to do about it, and we're going to do it. And another tool within the Elsi toolkit is the Gender Strong Unit Premium, which is for those nations that are already pathfinders and that are able to deploy a gender strong unit. A gender strong unit is where women have leadership roles and meaningful roles across the organization, and everybody in that unit is trained on a gender perspective and gender equality. Then they can receive a cash incentive from that fund. So we're experimenting with different ways to reward countries that are already on that pathway, and to encourage other countries that know it's important but haven't had the tools, and to provide them with the tools and the additional incentives in order take that step and move forward into the future.
Wonderful. Any comments? We're getting kind of closer to the end of our time. I have one additional question for sure, but before we move to that question, is there anything in what Gwen had to say that either Kasia or Tim you wanted to comment on? No. Great. So the next question, and I promise these have not all been preloaded. This one just came in. Came from Canada's ambassador to Ireland, and Nancy Smith. Her comment and question is, thank you for the session. Apologies if covered, which I don't think it has, so that's great. Could the panel please talk to how prevalent and important is the question of targets? So Tim, you have talked a bit about the fact that you don't necessarily have positions that you must fill with women, but are targets used more broadly, and have they been useful perhaps in other places for increasing the number of women peacekeepers and women in more senior positions? And if you have any comments, and this is for the entire panel, and if you have any comments on the first all-female policy unit that's been deployed from India to peacekeeping in Liberia. And I'll start with Tim on this one.
Well, it would be foolish for us to set targets for ourselves which we're not going to meet. 7% of our organization is female, 93% is male. If we were to put undue pressure under that 7% to continuously deploy overseas out of turn, it's possible that they would leave, and then we'd be in a worse position. We are, of course, aware of the targets set by the United Nations, and there are things we can do. We could, for instance, send more junior women to military staff officer appointments or military observer appointments. Traditionally, they were seen as being reserved for people with a lot of experience because of the type of work you were doing. But we do consider that. We're also very proud of the fact that our most senior member of the General Staff, female member of the General Staff, a Major General, is currently serving with the Office of the Military Advisor in UN headquarters as the Deputy Military Advisor, and she previously had served as a Deputy Force Commander and Acting Force Commander in Syria. So while we don't set targets, and we do not discriminate against men or female, we are definitely aware of the conversation that's ongoing. But until we can increase the number of women available to us in the organisation, it would be difficult for us to meet any of those targets.
Kasia or Gwen, do you have a comment?
Well, regarding those set up the numbers of women or percentage, it is also difficult for any country, because it reflects the numbers that we have in our country. So basically, it is more or less the same on the mission as it is in the army in the home country. So if we increase the number in which is increasing right now, as the rector already mentioned, then for sure we will also increase the number of the number of female representatives in the mission area. But when it comes to UN requirements, we also fulfill them like every time. From my personal experience, like my engagement team in Lebanon, there was the requirements from UN. Actually, it was just 4 people, but they wanted, like, the requirement was that half, so 50% should be female, and we were actually mixed 2-2. So if there are like specific requirements, they are always, I think, met with who is sent abroad.
I'm a fan of targets, actually, because if we don't have targets, if we don't know where we want to get to, then we don't figure out what the plan is about how to get there. And the UN has its Uniform Gender Parity Strategy, which has specific targets, and they are aspirational, and they are ambitious, but they are achievable. They're achievable if we figure out why the system is the way it is and what needs to change in order to get where we want to go. And that's the whole premise behind the Elsi initiative, is figuring out why are things the way they are, what are the barriers, and then how do we fix those? And as my fellow panelists have rightly said, you can't deploy more than you have, right? There's issues of fairness and of making sure that everybody in your institution has the opportunity to serve. So what you need to do is you need to fix the whole pipeline. And that goes right back to recruitment into police and military at the national level. And that's why the barrier assessment methodology is targeted to the national level and to those particular institutions, so that those institutions can figure out, okay, why aren't women coming in? Is it because they don't believe that there's a fair career path for them inside? Is there a fair career path inside? How, why are we able to easily recruit more men than women? What are the considerations and the concerns of the women? And so you fix the pipeline by opening the possibilities to all of your population. You fix the pipeline by looking at what the institutional problems are. And by doing that, you make the institution better for everybody. So men benefit from a more equal institution that takes into account things like the fact that men have family responsibilities. And then that also makes it a more effective institution. So you fix the pipeline as you also look for ways to incentivize countries to put their women into the candidacies for the UN positions, or as part of a national deployment to a UN peace operation. So I like targets. I appreciate that there are hurdles to achieving those targets, but we need to know where we're going in order to get there. Thanks.
Oh, I like a debate. That's wonderful. So thank you for that. I had said that was going to be our last question, but we've just had one in from one of our partners in this panel discussion, Lieutenant Colonel Targonska, who we all heard at the outset. And so and it's a great question. And so I will put it to you before we wrap up. And her question is relating to how we encourage women to participate in missions abroad. And so if the barrier is at the level of women to understand why they should be interested, how do we reach women with the idea of promoting service at missions abroad? What actions could be taken by peacekeeping countries, NATO member countries, to encourage more women to participate? What arguments would convince women, and what arguments would you use them to convince women to go abroad? If you have some examples of some what would attract women to these positions? I mean, some of it we have heard a little bit from, I think, from Kasia, because she's talked about her own personal interest and experience. But if you are in the position of selling this participation abroad, how would you sell it? And I think this would be this is your opportunity to provide your advertising pitch, perhaps. So I'll start perhaps with Kasia, and then we'll go to Tim and then to Gwen.
Well, first of all, I think there are lots of women who want to go abroad, and the first thing that is to give them the possibility to do so. So as I mentioned, you have to have the permission from your commander. And this is not my first time when I apply to all the commanders in all the units just to allow your people to go abroad. And because really I know lots of people who want to serve abroad. And then the second thing is, especially for female, but not only, as Colonel just said, and they have it in Ireland, those family-friendly missions that you can go for the shorter period of time. And this, I think, it would be very, very helpful. More or less, the UN also has it, but it's for the peacekeeper, for the observer missions. They have, normally the observer mission is for 1 year, but you can go just for the 6 months. And it's also kind of family-friendly. If you have small kids, then you may go as an observer just for 6 months. And I think that maybe some people are not aware of this, and that's why they don't want to apply. But I really love this family-friendly idea, because the most, I think, the biggest obstacles are kind of the family issues, that you have to leave your family for such a long time. And also I met lots of people, for example, from Germany, even here, that their deployment is shorter, like for 4 months. And then it's easier to convince your family, your partners, your kids, whoever you have to convince that this will be fruitful for you as a career, and then they will manage somehow to live without your presence as a mother or father. Actually, it doesn't matter.
I suppose we're a small military in a small country off the coast of Europe. We've been doing peacekeeping operations, participating in them for 63 years. So nobody joins the Defence Forces without knowing about peacekeeping. If you were to ask any Irish citizen the main role of the Defence Forces, UN peacekeeping would probably be number one. Our entire recruitment campaign, all of our material contains footage of soldiers serving overseas, men and women. So we don't have to encourage people to go. You're joining the Defence Forces to deploy overseas on peacekeeping operations. And similarly then, at the more strategic level, it's one of the key roles of the Defence Forces, along with defence of the state and aid to the civil power, which is like all of our counterparts worldwide. And it's also one of Ireland's signature foreign policies, peacekeeping, and our ambition to be a global island. And one of the reasons, that we're on the Security Council now is because, we're not only talking the talk, but we've been walking the walk for 63 years. So certainly we do not have to encourage anybody to participate. If you're in the Defence Forces, you're participating.
Okay, I'll just pick up on a couple of those points. First of all, people have to be aware of it as an opportunity, and that goes from recruitment then through selection and deployment. So, make sure that women are aware of the opportunity to serve in their military or police. In your recruiting material, make sure that the faces of women are represented in your materials so that people can see what to model. Make sure that an overseas assignment is recognized within the structure of your organization. Don't look at it as lost years. Recognize the skills, the attitude, the perspective, the knowledge, the experience that officers bring back to their home organization after they've lived and worked abroad. Make sure that you give women the opportunity to talk to women like Kasia, who have been out in the field. I think that is the single most important element in that final decision to say, yeah, that's the right choice for me, I'm going to pursue it, is hearing from experienced peacekeepers the good, the bad, and the ugly of serving abroad. And then the other thing is that you really have to ensure that the leadership who select for these missions are open-minded, and that they're prepared to look at the skills and the talents of their entire organization, and that they explicitly make it known they are looking for women to step forward just as much as they're looking for men to step forward. So it's a leadership question, and it's a question of having really great role models, and it's a question of recognizing the value that deploying women peacekeepers brings not only to the mission, but also to the home organization. And at the foundation, it's recognizing that every woman has the same right to serve as her male colleague.
Wonderful. That's great. That's great. Many useful and I think practical arguments, actually. Thank you for that. So thank you to all our panelists today for their responses to the questions received. And thank you to our audience for being engaged. And I will now turn to Her Excellency Emer O'Connell, Ambassador of Ireland to Poland, who will react to some of our discussion here today.
Merci beaucoup, Jeanette. Jako ambasador Irlandii w Polsce jest mi bardzo miło, że mogę dziś brać udział w tej ważnej dyskusji. Firstly, a warm word of thanks, a míle buíochas, as we say in our native Irish language, 1,000 thanks to all of you involved, the really rich discussion today. You shone a light not just on the need to increase women's participation and representation in peacekeeping, but you also very critically unpacked what that actually means in reality. Our over 60 years in peacekeeping, the Irish experience in peacekeeping has been referenced many times. And given that experience, in Ireland, we certainly know the importance and the urgency attached to the women in peacekeeping agenda. Advancing this important agenda is, as has been mentioned, a really critically important priority in the context of our current UN Security Council membership. We prioritise the WPS agenda, as it is known, not because there has been no progress over the past 2 decades, but we prioritise it because we believe we need to see significantly more progress. As we've heard multiple times today, a peacekeeping force with a greater gender mix contributes to the credibility of the mission. It contributes to effective community engagement. And ultimately, and most importantly, it really ensures enhanced protection for all. Our Minister for Foreign Affairs, Minister Simon Coveney, recently articulated very clearly that the Women, Peace and Security agenda is in fact a personal agenda. I think Lieutenant Colonel Timothy O'Brien very clearly articulated that today in the discussions. As a country, we have witnessed at first hand the transformative impact that women have had on the Northern Ireland peace process. That impact has been clear both in terms of the political agreement that was ultimately reached, but also today in continuing to work on that specific peace building. Our lived experience is certainly what guides us in terms of advocating for an inclusive approach to peace, very specifically. Most critically, we recognise that given that experience, we need to listen to a multitude of voices. And certainly, again, that ability to listen has also been very clearly set out for us today. Listening includes listening to voices from peacekeepers in the field, from within the multilateral system, from across government and amongst policymakers. It also includes from academia, from across civil society, and as Captain Katarzyna Jadkowska very eloquently outlined for us, listening very closely to community leaders on the ground. By ensuring a range of perspectives, we can more clearly identify accurately the barriers that there are to change and engagement. That multitude of voices were very clearly evident for us today, evident in the perspectives we brought not only from a variety of different seats, namely from a policy perspective through Director General Gwyneth Coots, from a training perspective through Lieutenant Colonel Timothy O'Brien, but also through the participation of Katarzyna Jadkowska. We have been able to consider, as a result of that multitude of perspectives and that multitude of country perspectives as well, this agenda from an important range of different angles. And I really want to thank each of you for so clearly articulating some of the challenges and the different issues that are at the heart of this really important agenda. I also want to say thank you to Lieutenant Colonel Beata Targonska at the Ministry of Defence for addressing us earlier. I know that I speak for both my Canadian diplomatic colleagues and for us at the Irish Embassy when I say that we have been delighted to work so closely with the our Polish hosts in facilitating today's webinar. The partnership in particular with the Military University of Technology has been central to delivering today's event. As a teaching university, you play a vital role in preparing the next generation of peacekeepers, both the men and the women who can continue to take this important agenda forward. And of course, we had a very clear and physical evidence of that today in the presence of Captain Katarzyna Jackowska. I also want to say very particularly thanks to all of the students for listening in today and for contributing questions to our discussion. To conclude, just let me reflect that our webinar, of course, is particularly timely. Each October, the UN Security Council holds its annual open debate on the Women, Peace and Security agenda. And that debate, as indeed the many side events that happen around it, enable all of the UN member states not just to share their perspectives on peacekeeping operations, it also enables us to gain the space to further identify barriers that women in peacekeeping face. So very clearly articulated today, it is not just about numbers, it's not just about targets, it is in fact about looking at the depth and the breadth, fixing the whole pipeline, as was clearly said, of the participation of women and men in peacekeeping and peace building globally. I certainly hope that given the quality of our discussions today, our webinar will contribute to advancing that important agenda. Many thanks to you all for engaging and for the important discussion. I'll hand you back now to our very able moderator, Jeanette.
Thank you. Thank you, Your Excellency. I dziękuję serdecznie naszej publiczności. This event would not have taken place without the strong support and the amazing team here at the Military University of Technology. Serdeczne podziękowanie dla Agaty Reed oraz Marcina Damkiewicza za zaangażowanie. And a final warm thank you of appreciation to our panelists. Do widzenia.